Well done, boy.
Hi, I'm Simon Canlish and welcome to another Marvelous Videos. Pronounced as Jormungandr, he happens to be one of the earliest beings to exist in Norse mythology. And if you call yourself a fan of all things mythology and folklore, then you are going to love what we'll be exploring today. Addressing every fan of Thor out there, do you know who happens to be the god of thunder's sworn enemy? Well, you can take as many guesses as you want, but we highly doubt if you can come up with the right answer. For reasons that were never really made clear, Jormungandr and Thor loathed each other, and venomously, may we add, thereby becoming each other's arch-enemy. The origin of Jormungandr, who is also addressed as the Midgard Serpent, or the World Serpent for that matter, goes back to the oldest written records of the Norse mythology, say back to the 13th century or even before that. We'd like to stress primarily on two sources, Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, as we delve deeper into things. While Poetic Edda happened to be a compilation of Norse narrative poems written by an array of unknown authors, Prose Edda is mainly a collection of myths compiled by Icelandic poet, historian and law speaker Snorri Sturluson. Well, it's about time everyone gets to know about this continent-sized sea serpent here, one who happens to be the middle child of Loki. We suggest that you stay tuned till the end of this video to learn everything about Jormungandr. You ready? Well, let's do it then. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Jörmungandr in Norse mythology. Meet the Midgard Serpent, who is known to encircle the entire realm of Midgard. In fact, in Norse mythology, he actually happens to be the biggest beast. We are talking about a serpent who is so large not only can he literally wrap his whole body around Midgard, but also grasp his very own tail. Mind you, the sea serpent's mouth is full of poison dripping teeth, and no one in their sane mind would want to be bitten by them. Oh, in case you didn't know, Jormungandr is huge and strong enough to not only gulp down a god, but also a giant completely. For that matter, the sea serpent prefers to spend most of his time alone and in darkness, which is beneath the ocean of course, and when he decides to surface, he can be quite vicious and destructive. Well, without any further delay, let's get on to his origin story right away. His origin. Jormungandr happens to be a son of Loki and the giantess Angrboda. So all of you wondering what is the reason behind Jormungandr's continental size? Well, he got it from his mama, and no puns intended here. Speaking of his destructive nature, there is no denying that he inherited that from his father. But truth be told, Jormungandr is way more bestial in nature than either of his parents. We learn from Prose Edda that Jormungandr, along with his elder brother Fenrir and younger sister Hel, was living with Angrboda in the kingdom of Jotunheim, which is popularly known as the realm of giants. But with Odin coming to know of Loki's offspring and that the latter were capable of creating trouble in the future, the All-Father wished to nip the situation right in the bud. Upon coming face to face with a crew of misfits, he had the wolf Fenrir tied up to a rock with magical ribbon on an island. He had Hel consigned to the underworld, and right upon seeing the serpent, he threw Jormungandr into a deep sea, hoping that he would drown. However, that was not the case, and the unrestrained Jormungandr devoured whatever and as much as he wanted, thereby growing to his full potential. He became large enough to surround the whole of Earth and even held his own tail in his very mouth. Lifting up the cat. We will begin with the first encounter that Jormungandr had with Thor, which has us delving deeper into the birth of their rivalry. Thor's primary encounter with Jormungandr is taken from a chapter of Prose Edda. It has Thor traveling with Loki and a human servant named Thelfi to Jotunheim in the hopes of having some kind of adventure. With them arriving at the stronghold of the giant Utgarda Loki, they are initially made fun of for being so undersized and puny, and also asked to prove their talents by taking part in competitions, all in exchange for hospitality. Loki is the first one who decides to participate in the fastest eating competition, and he is pitted against Loki of all the giants' court. While Loki is able to eat all the meat that is set before him in the trough, Loki ends up consuming the meat along with the bones as well as the trough, and is declared to be the clear-cut winner. Thor's human servant, Thelfi, is the next one to enter the competition, and he is seen racing against Hugi, who happens to be another courtier. Thelfi ends ends up losing to Hugi, not once but thrice. When it comes to Thor, he attempts to prove his strength by picking out a drinking contest. Thor is sure of victory, and although he drinks from the horn thrice, he still cannot empty it and ultimately accepts his defeat. Utgard Loki derides Thor and suggests him to lift up his house cat from the floor. Thor tries to, but he can barely get the cat's paws off the ground. He is seen struggling for a while, after which he accepts that he has failed the challenge. Nonetheless, Utgard Loki allows the group to spend the night in his castle, especially for their efforts. The next morning, Utgard Loki discloses that this contest was rigged. Loki, in reality, was not a courtier, but wildfire that consumed everything in the trough, which is why Loki could not win the contest. As for Thelfi's opponent, Hugi, he was Thor herself in reality, and we all know that that can run faster than anything in the world. Coming to Thor, the horn that he drank from had its base in the sea, which is why he could never really finish it. In fact, Thor had actually lowered the sea level in the process. As for the house cat, it wasn't a cat that Thor was dealing with. All this while he was simply trying to lift Jormungandr. It was Utgard Loki who had created the illusion of a cat, when in reality Thor was actually lifting up the world serpent. There was a time when the cat's paws were actually not touching the ground, and that did end up freaking out Utgard Loki and his men, because for the very first time Jormungandr could not really reach his own tail, which meant that the boundaries of the universe may have been altered had Thor completely lifted up the cat from the ground. So while the confession did make Thor happy that he was not as weak to pick up a cat, but the god of thunder was infuriated for being tricked, with Thor raising his Mjolnir in order to strike Utgard Loki for his acts of deception. The giant king had already disappeared into thin air along with his castle, leaving Thor, Loki and Thelfi with no choice but to return to Asgard with their heads hanging in shame. The fishing voyage. Next, we'll be talking about Thor's fishing expedition, which marked his first proper encounter with Jormungandr. Now, it is never really made clear as to why Thor and Jormungandr despise each other so much, but modern interpretations suggest that it's primarily because of two things. The first is the insult that Thor inflicted on the Serpent while trying to lift him up at Utgard Loki's castle, and the second happens to be Thor's unsettling rage at being tricked by the giant king. Anyway, focusing on Thor's next encounter, we move on with the story. Mind you, we'll be citing both from Poetic Edda as well as Prose Edda. Getting deceived by the giants did leave a bitter taste in Thor's mouth, and it goes without saying that he wanted to have another adventure right away. As per Heimisk Vioa, which happens to be the poetic version of the story, it opens up with Aesir gods returning back from hunting and urgently seeking for something to drink. Using augury twigs, they learn that the giant Aesir, who literally symbolizes the sea, has a huge collection of cauldrons and kettles. No wonder Thor heads over to a.k.a. and directs him to make them brew. Of course, a.k.a. does not like to be bossed around, so he asks Thor instead to bring him a cauldron, one that is big enough to satisfy their thirst. With the question remaining where to find such a big cauldron, Tyr, the Norse god of war, remembers that his father, the giant Hymir, is in possession of a particularly big cauldron, and he along with Thor travel to Hymir's house. Interestingly, this is where things become intriguing. According to the Prose Edda version, Thor is believed to have traveled to Hymir's abode alone, and there have been no mention of any cauldron or even the fact that Hymir happens to be Tyr's father. Anyway, coming back to the Poetic Edda version, Thor and Tyr reach Hymir's house and chant upon Tyr's grandmother first, then upon his mother. Soon the day changes to evening, and Tyr's mother asks Tyr and Thor to hide themselves somewhere in the house, since Hymir detested guests. With Hymir coming back and learning that there are guests at his place, he begins walking heavily around the house and deliberately breaking things in the process to figure out their hiding spots. This results in Hymir tiring himself out eventually, and Tyr and Thor revealing themselves before him. Hymir is left with no option but to greet them and half-heartedly orders 3 bulls to be killed for dinner. Thor ends up eating so much that Hymir decides to go fishing. Mind you, this is a different in Prose Edda, where Thor puts forward the idea of going fishing himself as he had his own plans of fishing Jormungandr out of the sea. With Hymir refusing to offer Thor any fishing bait, Thor strikes the head off Hymir's largest and favorite ox to use it as bait. Hymir rowed his boat to a point where he offers often caught fish and ended up catching 2 giant whales on his hook. Happy that they would be more than enough to get them through for the next few days, he tells Thor to return back to the shore. Well, if only Heimer knew what was in store next. Thor is seen taking control of the boat and demanding that they go further deep into the sea. As for Heimer, he protests fall on deaf ears. With Thor casting out his own bait, Jormungandr bites it just as Thor had expected. The mighty god of thunder is seen giving his fishing line a powerful jerk and yanking the sea serpent's head out of the water, finally coming face to face with each other. As he looked into the very eyes of Jormungandr, the latter spewed venom directly into his face. Thor could really literally feel his skin peel away because of the acidic venom, but he mustered up his rage and hatred that he had for the serpent, and grabbing hold of his Mjolnir, he swung it down with full force. What followed next totally depends on what version that you've read. If you've gone through Poetic Edda, Thor is reported to have crashed the skull of Jormungandr and killed the serpent. But if you have read the Prose Edda, Heimir, fearing for his life, cuts the fishing line, thereby setting Jormungandr free. Thor is highly infuriated by Heimer's actions and is said to have struck the giant with his hammer, making him fall into the water and heading back to shore all by himself. Ragnarok. Let's be clear of a few things right away when the topic in concern happens to be Ragnarok. One of the most distinctive things about Norse mythology is the fact that they actually believed in Ragnarok. It's hard for us to believe that fans of mythology and folklore would not know what Ragnarok is, but we would not really want to take any chances here. Ragnarok happens to be a series of events that end in a great battle, or in other words, the end of the world. Anyway, coming back to the events of our storyline here. Jormungandr wanted to destroy the existing order, and speaking of the gods here, they knew that they would meet their end in their final battle, which was inevitable. Ragnarok would be detected by the crumbling of human relationships, traditions, and let's not forget, severe winters. We are stressing on these 3 seasons of winter in a row without the slightest bit of sunlight. This is followed by Fenrir finally being able to break his magical chains and going absolutely berserk throughout the 9 realms of Norse cosmology. That's not all. His sons Skoll and Hati are even reported to have devoured the sun and the moon. As for the ship, Naglfar, one that was made out of fingernails of the dead, it is navigated across the seas by the giant Hiram. Eventually, Jormungandr is seen joining with his siblings, Fenrir and Hel, along with the fire giants and others on the battlefield of Vigrid. This is where the final meeting between Thor and Jormungandr takes place. While Thor slays Jormungandr, the mighty king of thunder gets heavily sprayed by the serpent's deadly venom in the process, thereby being able to walk only 9 paces before falling down dead. Jormungandr, the world serpent in God of War universe. It is in the 2018 action-adventure video game God of War, developed by Santa Monica Studio and published by the multinational video game and digital entertainment company Sony Interactive Entertainment, aka SIE, where we are introduced to Jormungandr's character as the world serpent. Please note that this character is not just any serpent here. He happens to be a mythical male Jotun serpent, one who is fated to fight Thor in Ragnarok, putting stress on the God of War universe, especially in the video game, which is released in April 2018. Jormungandr is seen to appear in the Lake of Nine, just like that, without any explanation. So there was a time when the serpent had fought against Thor in a battle, which was literally felt all across the Norse world, aka the 9 realms. But with the battle ending in a deadlock, Jormungandr is reported to have remained within the Lake of Nine since then. In fact, he became so enormous that he was able to surround the whole of Midgard. But with Jotnar being hunted down by the Aesir, most of them escaped to Jotunheim, making Jormungandr one of the last giants in Midgard. Jormungandr is stated to pass his time either by sleeping or by protecting the temple of Tyr, the Norse god of war. For those wishing to summon him, they can resort to a nearby horn to do that. Now, according to Mimir, who is also addressed as the smartest man alive, as per the prophecy of Ragnarok, Jormungandr and Thor are slated to engage themselves in a battle once again. It is believed that during the fight, Thor is bound to hit Jormungandr so hard that the impact will literally splinter Yggdrasil, break space-time, and send Jormungandr back to a time period even before his birth. This actually elucidates his sudden appearance in the Lake of Nine. Jormungandr initially comes face-to-face with a duo of Kratos and Atreus when he emerges from the Lake of Nine. While he is seen speaking to the duo for a brief period, he is in due course gets back to his slumber. The pair, unable to perceive his language, lay their hands on the head of Mimir to summon Jormungandr and learn how to go to Jotunheim. The very first thing that catches the attention of Jormungandr after waking up in this big statue of Thor. No wonder he ends up dismantling the statue by swallowing the upper part of the structure. Next, he is able to locate Kratos and Atreus and even recognize Mimir. When the latter introduces himself, Jormungandr gets infuriated when Mimir by mistake identifies the duo as friends of Odin, but upon him correcting, Jormungandr calms down. The Jotun Serpent decides to help them reach Jotunheim and also realigns the travel bridge in order to make sure that they are going in the right direction. As Kratos brings an ill Atreus to the Vanir goddess Freya's house, along with Mimir, they are able to hear the sound of the horn on the bridge. While this clearly meant that someone had summoned Jormungandr, who did it remains a mystery. Eventually, it dawns upon Kratos, Atreus, and Mimir that the statue of Thor may have held the second eye of Mimir, something that they were in dire need of in order to reach Jotunheim. When Mimir asks the serpent about the statue, the latter thinks that it may still be inside his stomach and allows them to enter his mouth and search for it. With the trio looking for the eye deep inside his stomach, Jormungandr gets ambushed by the Norse Aesir god of light and peace, Baldur. The attack has the trio getting spat out by Jormungandr next to the corpse of the frost giant Thamur. But when the reanimated corpse of Thamur attacks the trio, Atreus ends up calling out to Jormungandr, who immediately comes to help them out by attacking the corpse of Thamur. It is also during the same time that Kratos is seen defeating Baldur, while Jormungandr is seen mainly retreating after the fight and not seen again. The duo of Kratos and Mimir suggest that it is probably best to leave the serpent alone in order to give him some time to recover. Atreus is also seen shouting thank you to Jormungandr. Please know that while Jormungandr is seen appearing in the background, courtesy his gigantic size, the player cannot interact with the beast for the rest of the entire game. Speaking of the sequel to the 2018 game, the exact details of God of War Ragnarok are still not known, but what is certain is that the events of the game are reported to pick up after a gap of 3 years post the events of God of War. Jormungandr happens to be an integral part of the game, and he is actually seen having this mysterious connection with Atreus. It is incomplete to end this discussion about Jormungandr in the God of War universe if we do not put stress on his powers and abilities. We'd like to put special emphasis on his immense strength here. Please know that he is literally the strongest being to exist when it comes to the 9 realms. Then comes his speed level. He has the capability to move at marvelous speed in spite of his gargantuan size. Next is his level of durability. Jormungandr survived the Thor's assault, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Last but not least, he is in possession of an exceedingly potent venom, which is capable of killing a god who is as supreme as Thor. Jormungandr's astonishing appearance in other media. Vikings, the TV series, created and written by Michael Hurst for the History Channel back in March 2013. This historical drama TV series here was initially planned to be a mini-series. Vikings ended up being such a hit amongst the critics that it was renewed for a second season, and the rest, as you all know, is history. Inspired by the stories of Ragnar Lodbrok, the TV series initially followed the fierce Viking warrior Ragnar Lothbrok, along with his Viking brothers. But with the series moving ahead, it laid focus on Ragnar's sons and their own escapades. Characters such as Bjorn, Ivar, Sigurd, Uber, Vidserk emerged as the main protagonist of the series, continuing the storyline post Ragnar's death in the 4th season. Well, it was in the official trailer for Vikings Season 6 Part 2 that we got to witness a giant serpent emerging from the sea, and no points for guessing who it is. Of course, it is the terrifying looking Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, appearing in front of the character of Uber, while the latter happens to be on a mission to find the Golden Land. Jormungandr makes a grand but brief appearance in the 13th episode of Season 6, titled The Signal. It eventually becomes clear that the appearance of Jormungandr can be categorized under a vision, hallucination, or a nightmare for that matter. Ragnarok, the TV series. Adam Price's Norwegian fantasy drama streaming TV series basically happens to be a reimagining of the Norse mythology. So we have the fictional town of Edda in Hordaland, Western Norway, that is afflicted by severe climate change and industrial pollution caused mainly by the factories, which are owned by the local Utel family. But in reality, the Utels happen to be four Jotun disguised as a family. The series follows a high school student called Manje, challenging the Utils and starting a fight with almost anybody who is destroying the planet. Mind you, Manje isn't just a regular teenage boy, he happens to be the reincarnation of the god of thunder, Thor. The second season of Ragnarok has Manje getting joined by more people, or should we say different incarnations of other gods. Well, if you're wondering how exactly does the Midgard Serpent make an appearance here, we will get to the point right away. The ending of Season 2, the last episode of Season 2, titled All You Need Is Love, ends with Manje's younger half-brother, Loritz, who is the reincarnation of Loki, releasing the tapeworm that he has taken earlier from his stomach into Edda's waters. Loritz had birthed it, and he knows that it would grow eventually into a weapon, and in this case into the Midgard Serpent. He is seen kissing his child and asking him to grow big, mighty and strong, because if the latter manages to do that, then only he will win. Well, with this we have finally come to the end of our video here. Do hit us with your thoughts in the comment section and let us know how excited you are about the third season of Ragnarok. Also, stay tuned with us for more interesting content. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.